Hey, it's Joshua Vergara. What's going on, everybody? And these are our final thoughts on the OnePlus 5T. Now, I say final thoughts because we've already done an initial review on the OnePlus 5T, and we wanted to spend a little bit more time with it to make sure we brought you our real final thoughts. And that's what you're getting today. If you want to check on the initial review, you can see the card that's appearing right now, or go to the link in the description. And if you want even more detail on this device, you can head over to AndroidAuthority.com and read the full written review written by myself and David Imel. We are still enjoying the design of the OnePlus 5T, and that's mainly because of the screen that now takes up all of the front. There were a couple of changes that had to be made, but the vast majority of this design still takes cues from the original OnePlus 5. That includes the alert slider, and all of the buttons are in the same place. And of course, you still have the headphone jack, which is still a thing here on the OnePlus 5T, and the USB-C charging port down on the bottom. The main change that occurred here is that the fingerprint reader is now on the back. It's still the ceramic reader though, which means it's a very fast and a very reliable fingerprint reader for just unlocking the device really easily by simply tapping on the small circle now found on the back. But speaking of security, there is another way of unlocking the device now, and it is comparably quick to the fingerprint reader, and it's called Face Unlock. After putting your data into the device, you will be able to just look at the phone, and when you hit the power button, it will go straight into the interface. It is a bit scary quick, but in our testing so far, we haven't really been able to fool it, which is nice to know. However, the Face Unlock will not be used for all of the different functions for security, as in applications and certain other functions, you will still have to use either a passcode, a password, or your fingerprint, as they are much more secure, and OnePlus knows that. So there really isn't too much else that we can say about the design of the OnePlus 5T, but there is one nod that we want to give to OnePlus's dedication to first-party accessories. And that's because we got a bunch of cases with our review units, and to be honest, they're all pretty high quality. There's a red case that we used for a little while that really makes the phone stand out, but we did go back to the sandstone material for that case, and that's the one we've been using on our review unit. It's a bit of a throwback and reminds us of the time when these materials used to be what you actually got on the phone itself. So we can talk about that display. It's a 6-inch display coming in at full HD resolution, and it is an AMOLED panel, which means that the colors look really great, and OnePlus has done a great job of tuning it for its version of Android, Oxygen OS. If you do want to change the way that color is displayed on this screen, then you can go into the settings and go to color calibration. It does include a mode for sRGB, an adaptive mode, and you can actually get a slider that allows you to go completely cool or completely warm. It's nice to have this level of control over the display, but there are also some extra features that return from the OnePlus 5. One of the favorites is a reading mode, which I've already used for the Amazon Kindle application, and it has helped in making a long reading session even more comfortable. Aside from not moving to Quad HD resolution, there's really only one other missed opportunity when it comes to the OnePlus 5T's display, and that is the ambient display. It looks great, but we think that just a little bit of tweaking could have made this a great always-on display as well. But maybe not having an always-on display on here is one of OnePlus's ways of ensuring good battery life. And to be honest, our OnePlus 5Ts have had great battery life. With the 3300 mAh unit in here, we were able to get an average of over 5 hours of screen on time. But in my experience in particular, I actually got a few days where I had about 7.5 hours of screen on time throughout an entire 12 to 16 hour day. And of course, you can use dash charging to get the phone back up and running in no time at all. The rest of the hardware is still high quality like in the OnePlus 5, and they are the best specifications that are available now. The Snapdragon 835 is backed up by either 6 or 8 gigabytes of RAM, and then 64 or 128 gigabytes of onboard storage. You can also use dual SIM on here, but there is no SD card slot. Sound quality has been good across the board, including with calls on Facebook Messenger or otherwise, where we had clear calls and the people on the other side of the line said that we sounded loud and clear. The headphone jack returns, which is probably going to be good news for a lot of users out there, and it's a pretty good yet standard experience. If you have a good pair of headphones, then they're going to sound fine on here, but you do get a little bit of control in an audio tuner if you want to change that up a bit. And when it comes to Bluetooth headphones, you can even select what kind of codec it outputs to your Bluetooth headset. One thing I do want to give another nod to is the speaker. It's a bottom-mounted speaker, which is not ideal, but it still gets really loud without piercing the highs or muddling the lows. Now, I actually tested this while taking showers, which I think a lot of people do from time to time, and the OnePlus 5T turns out to be the loudest one that I've used without having a bad sound profile. But I did have to make sure the phone was outside of the shower doors because this phone does not have an IP certification. So finally we can get into the camera, and this dual lens here does not have a zoom lens like before on the OnePlus 5, which had a 2x optical zoom. This time you have a 20 megapixel f1.7 RGB sensor that is activated in low light situations so that it can group 4 pixels together for even better low light shots. Now that's a really lofty claim to make, and we wanted to test it against other phones like the original OnePlus 5, but also mainly the Pixel 2. Now, in our testing, we found that the secondary lens simply does not activate unless you're in the darkest of situations, which means that low light performance doesn't necessarily live up to the claims that OnePlus made. Now, the reason why that's a bit of a bummer is because in all other situations, the OnePlus 5T actually performs quite well, ranging from decent to actually pretty great. In broad daylight situations, photos are nice and sharp, the dynamic range is pretty adequate, and the color saturation is not too far off the deep end. The front-facing camera is a 16 megapixel shooter, and it does not have a portrait mode, but it still gets some pretty good selfies for those of you who prioritize that. But speaking of the portrait mode, it is still a good performer on the rear camera that you can use whenever you want to take a nice shot of somebody with a bokeh background. But without that optically zoomed lens, there is a wider angle to it, so you're going to get more in the background behind the sharp subject. We also tested the 4K video recording, which yielded some pretty good footage that is helped along by EIS, so that shaky footage will actually be stabilized a little bit better this time around. So the OnePlus 5T remains a good and reliable shooter to have in your pocket, but those claims about low light performance go largely unrealized, and that's a bit of a disappointment, and probably even more so for those of you who wanted to keep that zoom lens. We're going to end this off with software and Oxygen OS, which, pun intended, it's a breath of fresh air. Oxygen OS has become one of our favorite versions of Android simply because it doesn't try too hard. A new feature in this version of Oxygen OS is parallel apps, where you can have multiple versions of the same social media application if you do want to be able to change between them for different accounts. But aside from that, there are some other features that return here, but they've been refined, and overall, just the look of Oxygen OS has been further polished. It's as if Oxygen OS is coming of age, if you will. The app folders have a distinct but simplistic look, and the entire interface provides some customization options that are equal parts powerful yet subtle. For example, changing to the dark mode completely changes the way you look at Oxygen OS, and then changing the accent colors provides just that little bit of detail that makes it a personalized experience. Back at the home screens, you still have the shelf, which is a great place to put some widgets so that they don't cover up the wallpaper. And OnePlus includes a bunch of wallpapers that look wonderful on this AMOLED display, on top of pictures that were actually taken with OnePlus 5Ts that double as great backgrounds as well. And finally, if you need some extra customization, you can actually change the function of the soft keys so that you can change what they do if you hold on either of the buttons or double tap them. Oxygen OS refrains from having too many features or applications, and thus it also keeps from having redundancies. So it's a breath of fresh air to be able to say again that Oxygen OS is simplistically elegant. And this entire package comes in at a price that undercuts a lot of the main flagships out there. At $500 for the base model, you will be able to get a wonderful Android experience with a good camera and good hardware that screams premium, and you won't have to pay an arm and a leg. In a world where we're paying up to $1,000 for phones that have so many features in them that we might not ever use, it's great to be able to go back to the basics and just provide an experience that is incredibly reliable and something that you might be able to use for the better part of the next year or two. And you only have to pay $499 for it. So yes, we do think that people would have a great time with the OnePlus 5T, especially since it won't be so hard on the wallet. Keep it tuned to Android Authority for even more about the OnePlus 5T. Check out our initial review, and also check out the full review over at AndroidAuthority.com, written by myself and David ML. And then stay tuned for even more content from us about the OnePlus 5T and about the rest of the smartphones that you've seen here in 2017. And then after that, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and then head on over to AndroidAuthority.com, because we are your source for all things Android.